one of the main necessities of life, a necessity that has become all the more valuable as food prices have reached alarming, if not record levels in the past few months. Mike Parkin lives about 1 hour from London and does the shopping for his family. He says his food bills have risen by some 20% in the last 9 months.
As the prices continue to go up, you do start to wonder, you think, hang on, where is all this money going? How can something be £1 1 week and then within a space of 6 months or so be £1.80, £2, over £2, and it just doesn't seem to make any sense to me. It's frustrating because we've got hopefully moved to a bigger house before long. We're looking to save money. We've got a daughter to look after. We want to leave something behind for them, but we don't feel like we're in a position to save because the cost of living is increasing so dramatically and so quickly.
Increasing so quickly. It's a global trend which has seen the food price index rise by 15% in the past 4 months and 135% in the last 5 years. And within the EU, it's the United Kingdom which has won the dubious award of having the biggest increase in 6 out of 9 basic food commodities, such as bread and cereal and fish and vegetable oil.
Why do I think the price is going up? I can't say. Maybe the cost of production is becoming higher or more expensive, and maybe probably that's why.
Well, it's hard to tell who's responsible. I mean, the supermarkets probably have overheads that they have to deal with, don't they? So, you know, if there's rising costs for gas and electricity and wage increases, or I don't know if government put pressure on them to rise their prices. I don't know where the price comes from.
I just think supply and demand. It's, you know, basic supply and demand. More people want something, the less there is of something, the more expensive it becomes. And the supermarkets now know that they've got a monopoly on most things around the world.
Richard Dodd is the spokesman for the British Retail Consortium. He says it's unfair to blame supermarkets for rising food costs. Promotional and discount items have, if anything, protected consumers.
Food prices are going up. They're up by about 4.5% at the moment compared with a year ago. That food inflation has slowed very slightly so far this year. Of course, the reason is because a lot of the commodities that feed into food prices are going up very dramatically. Something like corn is up 94% compared with a year ago. Obviously, oil up very significantly as well. I think the key point is that the shop price of food in the UK is going up much, much more slowly than the commodities. And that's because retailing is tremendously competitive and retailers are not passing on the full impact of those commodity price increases.
While the role of supermarkets in rising food costs is controversial, so is another one, that of the speculators. Julian Orman is a senior researcher at the World Development Movement. He says traditionally speculating on food commodities was restricted to food buyers and producers. But in the last 5 years, the amount of investments in food rose from $35 to $300 billion. Orman argues speculating on food is more like gambling, especially when the stakes are so high.
There's two parallel trends going on at the same time. One is that you're finding investment banks and commodity index funds putting more and more money into commodities because they're convinced that they're only going to go in one direction price-wise, and that's up. So whether, you know, the demand for corn or wheat is going up or down in any given week, they don't care. They've placed a one-way bet on food prices going up. That in turn does drive food prices up in a gradual trend. But now we're also seeing, because there are sort of tensions around food supplies in some crops, that you get other speculators in as well, the hedge funds, and what they want to do is see a short-term quick win return. So they feel the sort of herd behavior which happens when they see a sort of sudden report about Russian wheat sort of harvests being low. They pour into the market, and that creates the volatility, which is a real killer for both consumers and farmers.
For many farmers, the cost of production has risen, but not anywhere as high or as fast as the price of food commodities. Peter Kendall is head of Britain's National Farmers Union. He has an arable farm of over 600 hectares in Bedfordshire. He says rising food prices are strongly linked to supply and demand. A supply hurt, for example, by lost wheat production in countries such as Russia, but also from a growing demand by a world population increasing at 70 million people per year.
I think it's a really emotive subject on speculation. And of course, to some of my farmer members in the NFU who keep pigs or chickens, they worry that the prices are being forced up. So I think it is a complicated subject, speculation. But remember that for every person who's selling, there's a buyer. Every buyer who thinks is going sky high, there's somebody who, as that price goes up, who's selling to get out because they think it's a fair price for their business. And as a farmer, I need people to want to be buying that product and make sure there's fluidity in the market.
Many farmers argue speculators are needed to create a balance between supply and demand at a fair market price. But the growing concern is that prices are anything but fair in developing countries, where in some places the cost of bread rose by over 100% in the last year. Sam Bowman is from the Adam Smith Institute, which promotes a free trade market void of tariff barriers. He says speculators act as shock absorbers to deflect the full impact of food shortages, and that it's price controls and not price rises which create social unrest.
The response in a lot of developing world countries by the government is to put on price controls and to say the price of bread can't go above, say, £1 a loaf. But what that means is you would get a huge black market because people are willing to pay £1.50 for a loaf because they're hungry and they need this. I've heard a really interesting theory about the Egyptian revolution because a few months ago Mubarak's government imposed price controls on some kind of key food, things like bread, stuff like that. And there were shortages there, and the whole country really kind of felt the pain of these price controls. So it's a really interesting possibility that price controls were an indirect cause of the overthrow of the Mubarak regime. You've also seen riots over the price of food or the shortages of food, I should say, in Mozambique. And we're probably going to see a lot more of it unless governments realise that prices need to fluctuate according to supply.
Letting prices fluctuate according to supply and demand, the cornerstone principle of a free market economy. But how do bank speculators fit into a market where prices have been fluctuating so quickly and so dramatically? Some argue there needs to be more transparency when the risks are so high.
There's 2 points I think it's important to bear in mind. One is that any speculation that increases the price of food for a household that may spend 60, 70, 80% of its income on food is immoral and unnecessary because nobody benefits from this. A handful of super rich traders are benefiting and the majority of us, rich and poor alike, are suffering. So and the second point is that it's unnecessary because there's lots of other ways to make money in financial markets. You don't need to bet on food.
Betting on food. It's an emotional debate which has turned investment bankers once again into the black sheep of the economy. But with the world population set to hit 7 billion, and with both social turmoil and natural disasters sweeping the global landscape, the fear is that food prices will continue to rise even without the speculators.